Blood trickled down Zoe's chin as the security guard pinned her against the wall. "First class is not for your kind," he snarled. Then a commanding voice cut through the terminal. "Take your hands off my daughter, everyone." Froze. The airline CEO had arrived. Before we dive into this shocking story, where are you watching from today? Hit that like button and subscribe if you've ever witnessed discrimination firsthand. The story I'm about to tell will make you question everything about privilege and power in America. Gabriella Johnson stared at the first-class ticket in her hand, still unable to believe it was real. The 18-year-old traced her fingers over the embossed Gateway Airlines logo, the paper stock thicker and more luxurious than anything she had ever owned. As the early morning sun filtered through the small window of her South Chicago apartment, Ella allowed herself a moment of pure, unbridled joy. After years of straight A's, countless all-nighters, and sacrificing her social life for academic excellence, her hard work had finally paid off. Harvard University, not just admission, but a full-ride Presidential Scholar Award that included this first-class ticket to Boston. "You still looking at that thing?" Vanessa Johnson appeared in the doorway of their cramped bedroom, dark circles under her eyes, evidence of her overnight nursing shift. Despite her exhaustion, pride radiated from her face. "You earned every bit of it, baby girl." Ella carefully tucked the ticket into her passport holder. "I just want to make sure it's still real, Mom." Vanessa crossed the room and sat beside her daughter on the bed that took up most of the available space. At 43, Vanessa's face showed the lines of raising a child alone in one of Chicago's toughest neighborhoods. She had worked double shifts for years, sometimes going without meals so Ella could have the books and computers she needed for school. "Your father would be so proud," she whispered, touching the small photo of James Johnson on Ella's nightstand. He had been gone 12 years now, killed in a convenience store robbery when Ella was just 6. "I know, Mom," Ella said, blinking back tears. "I wish he could see me now." "He sees you," Vanessa assured her, squeezing her hand. "Now, do you have everything packed? Your flight leaves in 4 hours, and we need to get to the airport early." Ella nodded and gestured to her meticulously packed suitcase. She had spent the previous night researching first-class etiquette online, terrified of making some mistake that would reveal she didn't belong. She had even used her graduation money to buy a new outfit, dark blue slacks and a crisp white blouse that looked professional without trying too hard. "I printed out all the scholarship documents again, just in case," Ella said, pointing to a folder on her desk. "And I downloaded the Airline app and already checked in. That's my girl, always prepared." Vanessa smiled, though her eyes betrayed her worry. She had taught Ella from an early age about the realities of being black in America, how she would need to work twice as hard for half the recognition, how to interact with authority figures, how to navigate spaces that weren't designed with her in mind. During the 40-minute drive to Atlanta International Airport, Vanessa went through her usual checklist of cautions. "Keep your scholarship letter handy." "Yes, Mom, don't raise your voice, no matter what." "I know, Mom. And if someone questions, you be polite but firm." "I've got this, Mom, really." As they pulled up to the departures terminal, Ella felt a flutter of anxiety in her stomach. The airport was massive and buzzing with activity. Security personnel were highly visible, some with dogs, a reminder of the nation's ongoing tensions. "Text me when you get to your gate, and as soon as you land," Vanessa instructed as she helped Ella with her luggage. "And remember, I know," Ella interrupted with a gentle smile, "I belong there. Harvard chose me because I earned it." They embraced one final time before Ella walked into the terminal alone. As she made her way through the crowded airport, she couldn't help but notice the subtle shifts in people's behavior. The way some travelers clutched their bags tighter as she passed, how others averted their eyes or changed direction. These microaggressions were so familiar. She had learned to push them to the background of her consciousness. When she finally reached the first-class check-in counter, Ella took a deep breath and straightened her shoulders. She had earned this. The scholarship committee had selected her from thousands of applicants. She belonged here, regardless of what anyone else might think. With her head held high, she approached the counter, her first-class ticket and ID ready in her hand. "Next, please." The Gateway Airlines check-in attendant beckoned Ella forward with a practiced smile that vanished the moment she took in the young black woman approaching her counter. The attendant, whose name tag read Christine, was in her mid-40s with bottle blonde hair pulled back so tightly it seemed to strain against her scalp. "Good morning," Ella said, placing her ID and first-class ticket on the counter. "I'm checking in for the 11:30 flight to Boston." Christine's eyes flicked from Ella to her documentation and back again. Her mouth tightened into a thin line. "First class?" she asked, making no move to touch Ella's ticket. "Yes, ma'am," Ella replied, keeping her voice steady despite the familiar knot forming in her stomach. "It's part of my scholarship package to Harvard." Christine's eyebrows rose fractionally. "I see. And this ticket was purchased by the Hayes Foundation Presidential Scholars Program," Ella explained, reaching into her bag for her scholarship letter. "I have the documentation right here." Christine barely glanced at the letter before picking up her phone. "I'll need to verify this. It's procedure," she added, though Ella noticed she hadn't needed to verify anything for the white businessman. She'd checked in just moments before. "Of course," Ella said, maintaining the polite demeanor her mother had drilled into her. Around them, other passengers were being processed efficiently. Only Ella's line seemed frozen in time. After a brief conversation, Christine hung up and turned to Ella with a tight smile. "My supervisor is coming to assist us. If you could step aside for a moment." "Is there a problem with my ticket?" Ella asked, still calm but increasingly concerned. "We just need to verify some information. It's unusual for..." Christine trailed off, but her meaning was clear enough. Within minutes, a man in a crisp Gateway uniform approached. His badge identified him as Richard Whitley, customer service manager. He was tall with thinning red hair and a perpetual frown that deepened when he looked at Ella. "Miss, I understand there's a question about your ticket." His tone was immediately confrontational. "There shouldn't be," Ella replied, gesturing to her documentation. "Everything is in order. The Hayes Foundation provided this ticket as part of my scholarship to Harvard." Richard picked up her ticket and examined it with exaggerated scrutiny. "This appears to be a first-class ticket." "Yes, sir, that's correct. And you're claiming the Hayes Foundation purchased this for you?" Ella bristled at the word claiming, but kept her composure. "Yes, I have the letter right here explaining the scholarship package." Richard barely glanced at the letter. "Do you have any idea how much a first-class ticket costs, young lady?" The condescension in his voice made Ella's cheeks burn. "I understand it's expensive, sir. That's why I'm grateful to the foundation." By now, other passengers were openly staring. Some had taken out their phones. Sensing the confrontation brewing, Ella felt her heart racing, but remembered her mother's words, "Don't raise your voice, no matter what. We've had incidents of ticket fraud recently." Richard continued, "particularly with these charitable foundation tickets. The Hayes Foundation is the corporate philanthropy program of Gateway Airlines itself." Ella pointed out, her voice quavering slightly. "Mr. Lawrence Hayes is your CEO." Richard's face flushed. "I'm well aware of who my CEO is, miss, but that doesn't change the fact that we need to verify this ticket's authenticity." "How can I help you do that?" Ella asked, desperately trying to maintain her dignity as more onlookers gathered. Instead of answering, Richard turned to Christine. "Call security. I want this ticket thoroughly checked." "That's really not necessary," Ella began, but Richard cut her off. "It's necessary when someone like you shows up with a first-class ticket. That costs more than you probably make in months," he snapped, dropping all pretense of customer service. Ella felt as if she'd been slapped. "What do you mean, someone like me?" Before Richard could respond, a security guard appeared. He was a bulky man with a shaved head and cold eyes. His name tag read Taylor Brooks. "What seems to be the problem?" Brooks asked, his hand already resting on his weapon. "Potential ticket fraud," Richard replied, jerking his head toward Ella. "Need to detain her for questioning." "Sir, please," Ella said, her voice rising despite herself. "I've done nothing wrong. This is a legitimate ticket." "Lower your voice," Brooks warned, stepping closer to Ella. "We don't want any trouble here." "I'm not causing trouble," Ella insisted, feeling panic rising in her chest. "I just want to board my flight." "I can Call the foundation right now to verify. As she reached for her phone, Brooks grabbed her wrist. Put that down. Now, I just want to call to verify. I said put it down. Brooks twisted Ella's arm, causing her to gasp in pain and drop her phone. The device clattered to the floor, its screen cracking on impact. My phone, Ella cried, instinctively pulling against Brooks' grip. What happened next occurred so quickly. Ella could barely process it. Brooks spun her round, slamming her against the nearby wall with enough force to knock the breath from her lungs. Her cheek scraped against the rough surface, and she felt the skin split. Warm blood trickled down her chin. First class is not for your kind, Brooks snarled in her ear, his voice low enough that only she could hear the words, but loud enough that she would never forget them around them. The terminal had gone eerily quiet. Some passengers continued filming while others looked away in discomfort or shame. No one intervened. No one spoke up. Brooks began dragging Ella toward the security office, her feet barely touching the ground. She could taste blood and tears as her mind raced through the consequences. Would she miss her flight? Would Harvard rescind her scholarship? What would her mother say through her blurred vision? Ella noticed that the first-class line had resumed operations. A white family was being checked in by Christine, their process smooth and efficient. No questions, no verification, no security, just smiles and wishes for a pleasant flight. The airport terminal had transformed into a battleground where Ella's dignity and future were the casualties. As Brooks continued dragging her toward the security office, a commanding voice cut through the chaos like a thunderclap. What the hell is going on here? The question hung in the air as every head turned toward its source. Standing just inside the terminal entrance was a tall, imposing figure in an impeccable charcoal suit. Lawrence Hayes, CEO of Gateway Airlines, had arrived for an unannounced inspection of terminal operations, a practice he had instituted after taking over the struggling airline 3 years ago. At 52, Hayes carried himself with the confidence of someone accustomed to authority. His dark skin contrasted sharply with silver-streaked hair, and his expression was one of barely contained fury as he strode toward the scene. Sir, this is a security matter, Brooks began, still gripping Ella's arm. Take your hands off her. Now. Hayes' voice was quiet, but carried such authority that Brooks immediately released Ella, who stumbled slightly before regaining her balance. Hayes looked at Ella's bleeding face, then at the security guard and airline staff. His jaw tightened visibly. Someone explained to me why this young woman is bleeding in my terminal. Richard stepped forward, his earlier confidence faltering. Mr. Hayes, sir, we were investigating a potential case of ticket fraud. Standard procedure to assault teenagers in my airport. Hayes interrupted, his voice dangerously controlled. She was resisting. Brooks started. I saw enough. Hayes cut him off and turned to Ella. Are you all right, miss? His voice softened as he addressed her. Johnson. Gabriella Johnson, she replied, trying to stop her hands from shaking. I'm okay, just confused about why this happened. Hayes studied her face for a moment, recognition dawning in his eyes. Gabriella Johnson, Harvard presidential scholar. Correct. Bella's eyes widened in surprise. Yes, sir. How did you? I was at the selection committee meeting last month, Hayes explained, a small smile breaking through his anger. Your essay on healthcare disparities in urban communities was exceptional. The look on Richard's face shifted from confusion to horror as realization set in. Christine had gone pale behind her counter. You know her? Richard asked weakly. I personally approved her scholarship package, Hayes confirmed, his voice hardening again as he turned back to his employees. The same scholarship that included this first-class ticket. You've accused her of fraudulently obtaining. Have you ever witnessed someone in authority abuse their power? Comment number 1 if you believe that racial profiling happens every day in America, or number 2 if you think situations like Ella's are isolated incidents. Like and subscribe to join our conversation about systemic discrimination in everyday life. But what happens when the tables turn so dramatically? How would you feel in Richard and Christine's position? Suddenly realizing you've made a terrible mistake that could cost you everything? And how would you feel in Ella's position, vindicated, but still bleeding and humiliated? The memory of The scholarship reception flooded back to Hayes as he looked at Ella. He had been impressed by her poise during her acceptance speech, how she had spoken about her single mother's sacrifices, and her plans to become a physician and return to serve her community. Out of 30 recipients, she had been the standout, the one he had mentioned to his wife later that evening as going places. Now, seeing her bleeding and frightened, something paternal and protective awakened in him. His own daughter Charlotte was only 2 years older than Ella. Ms. Johnson is a guest of honor for Gateway Airlines, Hayes announced loudly enough for everyone in the vicinity to hear. She is flying first class because she earned it. Because my foundation selected her from thousands of applicants as somewhat exceptional. He turned to Richard and Christine, his voice dropping to a near whisper that somehow carried more weight than a shout. What made you question her ticket? I want the honest answer, Richard stammered. We've had fraud cases recently. Stop lying, Hayes cut in. We've had exactly 3 fraud cases in the past year, all perpetrated by middle-aged white men. Try again. The silence that followed was deafening. Finally, Christine spoke, her voice small. She didn't look like she belonged in first class. And what exactly does first class look like? Christine, Hayes asked. No answer came. Hayes turned to Brooks. You're suspended. Effective immediately. Gateway will be reviewing our contract with your security firm. He looked at Richard and Christine. You too. Report to HR when your shifts end. Now get back to work. As the chastened employees dispersed, Hayes gently guided Ella away from the prying eyes and still recording phones of other passengers. Let's get you cleaned up and on your flight, Ms. Johnson. I believe we can still make your departure time. A first aid attendant was called, and while Ella's cut was being treated, Hayes made a series of rapid-fire phone calls, ensuring the incident would be properly addressed. Between calls, he spoke to Ella. I'm deeply sorry this happened to you, he said, genuine remorse in his voice. This is not what Gateway Airlines stands for. Thank you for stepping in. Ella replied, wincing slightly as the attendant applied antiseptic to her cheek. I don't know what would have happened if you hadn't arrived. I do, Hayes said grimly, and it's unacceptable. I promise you this will be addressed at every level of the company. Once Ella was patched up, Hayes personally escorted her through security and to the first-class lounge, where he ensured she had everything she needed before her flight. Your seat has been upgraded to our premium first-class cabin, he told her, and I've arranged for our best flight attendant to look after you. Her name is Madison. If you need anything at all, just ask her. As they walked to the gate together, Hayes could see that despite her composed exterior, Ella was still shaken. Ms. Johnson, he said as they reached the boarding area, what happened today was not your fault. It was a failure of my company and the people I employ. I want you to remember that you belong in first class at Harvard and anywhere else your talents take you. Ella nodded, grateful for his words, but still processing the trauma of the past hour. As they announced boarding for her flight, Hayes handed her his business card. My personal number is on the back, he said. If you encounter any other issues today, or if you need anything at all during your time at Harvard, please don't hesitate to call me directly. With that, Lawrence Hayes, CEO of Gateway Airlines, watched as Ella boarded her flight, his mind already turning to the systemic changes needed to ensure this never happened again. The luxury of Gateway Airlines' first-class cabin felt surreal to Ella. As she settled into her wide leather seat, her cheek throbbed beneath the bandage, a physical reminder of the morning's events, but it was the invisible wounds that cut deeper. The flight attendant Madison, a petite woman with a warm smile, approached with a hot towel and a concerned expression. Ms. Johnson, I was briefed about what happened. I'm so sorry. Can I get you anything for the pain? I'm fine, thank you, Ella replied automatically, the response she'd been conditioned to give regardless of how she actually felt. She accepted the towel, pressing it gently against her uninjured cheek, and turned toward the window. Madison lingered. Mr. Hayes instructed me to ensure your comfort throughout the flight. We have champagne. Sparkling cider or water is fine, Ella interrupted, unable to summon enthusiasm for the first-class experience she had been so excited about just hours earlier. As other passengers boarded, Ella felt their curious glances. Word had spread quickly. Some looked sympathetic, others uncomfortable, and a few seemed almost resentful of her presence, as if her confrontation with airport staff had been an inconvenience rather than an injustice. An older white couple took the seats across the aisle. The woman leaned over and whispered to her husband, "That's the girl from the terminal, the one who caused the scene." Ella pretended not to hear, but each word felt like another small cut. She had been the victim, yet somehow the narrative was already shifting to make her the instigator. Meanwhile, aboard her delayed flight from Chicago to Boston, Vanessa Johnson clutched her phone in growing panic. Her motherly instinct had been screaming since receiving Ella's cryptic text. "Had a problem at check-in. CEO helped. I'm okay. Call when I land." Vanessa had immediately tried calling, but Ella's phone went straight to voicemail. Subsequent calls to the airport customer service line had yielded nothing but vague reassurances that her daughter had boarded her flight. Something had happened, something serious enough that the airline's CEO had become involved, and the not knowing was torture. Back on Ella's flight, Madison distributed pre-takeoff beverages when she reached Ella. Her professionally bright smile faltered slightly. "Such a shame about your face," she said in what she clearly thought was a sympathetic tone. "Though I'm sure it must be nice to have Mr. Hayes take a special interest in you. Not many people get that kind of attention." The implication was clear. Ella hadn't earned her place. She had received special treatment. It was a familiar sentiment, one that had followed her throughout her academic career whenever she achieved recognition. "Mr. Hayes recognized me from the scholarship program," Ella explained quietly. "His foundation sponsors my Harvard scholarship." "Oh," Madison's eyes widened. "That makes sense. I was wondering." She trailed off, seemingly realizing the inappropriate direction of her thoughts. "Wondering what?" Ella pressed, suddenly. Tired of the polite evasions, Madison flushed. "Nothing. It's just unusual to see. I mean, first class is typically..." She fumbled for words. "Typically what?" "Typically white," Ella finished for her, keeping her voice low but direct. "That's not what I meant," Madison protested, though her expression suggested otherwise. "I should check on other passengers. Let me know if you need anything." As Madison retreated, Ella closed her eyes, fighting back tears. This was supposed to be a triumphant day, the beginning of her journey to Harvard, the culmination of years of hard work. Instead, it had become another reminder that no matter her achievements, some people would always see her skin color first. Outside the aircraft, phones buzzed across the country as videos of the incident spread across social media. #GateWarism and #FirstClass while black began trending, accompanied by clips showing Brooks pinning Ella against the wall, and Hayes' subsequent intervention. At Gateway's corporate headquarters, Lawrence Hayes had convened an emergency meeting with his executive team. The sleek conference room overlooking the Atlanta skyline now felt like a war room. "I want to understand how this happened," Hayes said, his calm voice belying his fury. "And I want solutions to ensure it never happens again." Melissa Winters, Gateway's chief operating officer, cleared her throat. The initial reports suggest the check-in staff and security were following profiling guidelines that were implemented during the Thompson administration. Thompson had been Hayes' predecessor, a CEO known for prioritizing profits over people. Hayes had spent 3 years dismantling many of Thompson's policies, but clearly some remained entrenched in the company culture. These guidelines were supposed to have been eliminated, Hayes said. "Why are they still being followed?" Diana Chen, head of human resources, looked uncomfortable. "It appears they were unofficially maintained by mid-level management and security operations. On paper, they don't exist anymore, but in practice, we're still racially profiling our passengers." Hayes finished for her. "This stops today. I want a complete audit of all security procedures, official and unofficial, and I want Richard Whitley and Christine Palmer's employment records on my desk within the hour." As the meeting continued, Hayes' phone buzzed with a text from his wife. Charlotte saw the videos. "She's upset. Says it could have been her." Hayes closed his eyes briefly. His 20-year-old daughter, attending Brown University, had experienced similar instances of profiling despite Or perhaps because of being the biracial daughter of a prominent executive. He had tried to shield her from such experiences, using his position and privilege as armor. But America had a way of reminding Black people of their perceived place, regardless of their accomplishments or connections. By the time Ella's plane reached cruising altitude, her phone had already filled with notifications. Friends and former teachers had recognized her in the viral videos. News outlets were requesting statements. Harvard's admissions office had emailed expressing concern about the unfortunate incident and offering support services upon her arrival. The scholarship that had once felt like pure opportunity now seemed to come with unexpected burdens. As Ella scrolled through the messages, a new one appeared from an unknown number. "Hi Ella, this is Charlotte Hayes. My dad told me what happened. I go to Brown. If you ever want to talk to someone who gets it, I'm here." Ella stared at the message, unsure how to respond. Did she want a connection to the Hayes family beyond the professional relationship of scholarship? Recipient, would accepting Charlotte's offer of friendship feel like an obligation because of her father's intervention? Before she could decide, another message appeared from her mother. "Just landed in Boston. We'll be waiting when you arrive. I love you so much." At least that was simple. Whatever complications lay ahead at Harvard, whatever fallout came from becoming the unwitting face of yet another viral racial incident, Ella knew her mother would be there, steady and loving as always. As the plane began its descent into Boston, Ella looked out at the approaching city, its academic spires and historical landmarks bathed in afternoon sunlight. She had dreamed of this moment for years, imagining the excitement and possibility she would feel. Instead, she found herself wondering if she truly belonged in this new world, or if today's humiliation was just a preview of the challenges to come. The Gateway Airlines corporate headquarters buzzed with frantic energy as communications staff hurried through hallways. Digital marketing specialists monitored social media in real time, and executives huddled in glass-walled offices. The company's stock had already dropped 3% since the market opening, a direct response to the viral videos now playing on every major news network. In the main conference room, Jessica Alvarez, Gateway's chief communications officer, stood before a digital screen displaying various news headlines. Black Harvard scholar racially profiled at Gateway check-in. Airline CEO intervenes in racial profiling incident. Gateway Airlines faces backlash over treatment of Black passenger. "We need to get ahead of this," Jessica said, addressing the crisis management team. "Our initial statement acknowledged the incident and expressed regret, but we're being hammered for not explicitly condemning the racial aspect." Lawrence Hayes sat at the head of the table, his normally impeccable appearance showing signs of strain. He had barely slept, spending most of the night reviewing security footage and employee records. "Then we condemn it," he said firmly. "This wasn't just poor customer service or a misunderstanding. This was racial profiling, plain and simple." William Preston, Gateway's largest shareholder and board member, cleared his throat. At 73, Preston represented old money and older attitudes. "Lawrence, I think we need to be careful about admitting racial motivation. The legal implications are less important than doing what's right." Hayes interrupted. "I saw it with my own eyes, William. That young woman was targeted because she was Black. Period. The board is concerned," Preston continued, undeterred. "Acknowledging racial bias opens us up to potential class action lawsuits." Thompson always maintained a policy of addressing individual incidents without admitting systemic issues, and that's precisely why we're in this mess, Hayes countered. Years of sweeping these individual incidents under the rug has created a culture where employees feel empowered to discriminate. Jessica projected a new slide showing the results of an emergency audit of customer complaints over the past year. "We've identified 47 incidents with potential racial bias elements in the last 12 months alone. Most were resolved with form apologies or travel vouchers." Hayes felt his blood pressure rising. "So this has been happening regularly, and we've been essentially paying people off with vouchers instead of addressing the root cause?" "That was the established protocol," Jessica admitted uncomfortably. "Not anymore," Hayes declared. "Draft a new statement. We acknowledge the racial nature of the incident, apologize unequivocally, and outlined specific steps we're taking to address the systemic issues. As the meeting continued, Hayes received a text from his assistant, Richard. Whitley and Christine Palmer are in HR for their disciplinary meetings. Taylor Brooks has not reported for his shift and isn't answering calls. Meanwhile, in a sparse conference room 2 floors below, Richard Whitley sat across from Diana Chen, Gateway's HR director. His earlier arrogance had evaporated, replaced by defensive desperation. "I was following protocol," Richard insisted, pushing a dog-eared manual across the table. Section 7.3 outlines passenger risk assessment guidelines. "We were trained to identify passengers whose appearance or behavior doesn't match their ticket." "Class," Diana flipped through the manual with growing horror. The document, dated from the Thompson era, contained thinly veiled instructions for profiling based on race, ethnicity, and apparent socioeconomic status. "This protocol was officially discontinued 3 years ago," she said. "Maybe on paper," Richard replied, "but our regional director made it clear that these practices were still expected." He called it maintaining standards. In another room, Christine Palmer was having a similar conversation, tearfully explaining how she had been trained by longtime employees who emphasized that certain types of passengers warranted extra scrutiny in premium classes. As these conversations unfolded, an anonymous employee leaked internal emails to a prominent tech blog. The emails, exchanged between mid-level managers, explicitly discussed maintaining passenger quality control. Despite the new politically correct policies from upstairs, several messages specifically mentioned targeting urban-looking passengers. For additional verification, a barely coded reference to black travelers. By mid-afternoon, the leaked emails had spread across news outlets and social media, further inflaming public outrage. #BoycottGateway was now trending nationally, with several celebrities and influencers publicly canceling their Gateway frequent flyer memberships. Lawrence Hayes looked up from his computer to find William Preston standing in his office doorway, his face grim. "The board is calling an emergency meeting," Preston announced without preamble. "There are concerns about your handling of this situation." Hayes leaned back in his chair. "Let me guess. I'm being too transparent, too apologetic, and not protecting the company's financial interests." "You're the CEO of a publicly traded company, Lawrence. Your primary responsibility is to shareholders. My primary responsibility is to run an ethical company that treats all customers with dignity," Hayes countered. "If the board doesn't understand that, perhaps they should find another CEO." Preston's eyes narrowed. "That's exactly what some members are suggesting." After Preston left, Hayes made a personal call to Vanessa Johnson, who had been trying to reach Gateway customer service for hours. "Mrs. Johnson, this is Lawrence Hayes, CEO of Gateway Airlines." There was a moment of silence before Vanessa responded, her voice tight with controlled emotion. "Mr. Hayes, I understand you helped my daughter today. I intervened in an unacceptable situation, but not soon enough to prevent her from being hurt." Hayes said honestly, "I wanted to personally apologize and assure you that we're taking concrete steps to address both the specific incident and the underlying issues." "My daughter's face is cut open," Vanessa said, her composure cracking slightly. "She's on the national news. How exactly do you plan to make that right?" It was a fair question, and one Hayes had been wrestling with since the incident. "We can't undo what happened," he acknowledged, "but I promise you that those responsible will be held accountable, and we will make substantive changes to ensure this doesn't happen to anyone else. That's what companies always say." Vanessa replied skeptically, "And yet here we are." "I understand your skepticism," Hayes said, "but I'd like to meet with you and Ella when things have settled a bit. Not for publicity, but to discuss how Gateway can meaningfully address the harm caused and support Ella going forward." After ending the call, Hayes stared out his office window at the Atlanta skyline, thinking about his own daughter. Charlotte had texted him earlier, "Dad, these Gateway employees are saying exactly what I hear at Brown all the time. You don't look like you belong here. When does it end?" He had no good answer for her, or for Ella Johnson, or for himself. As evening fell, the board meeting convened via video conference. Hayes presented his plan for addressing the crisis. transparency about the incident, accountability for those involved, and comprehensive reforms to Gateway's training and security procedures. The response was mixed. Some board members supported Hayes' approach, recognizing both the moral imperative and the long-term business benefits of addressing systemic discrimination. Others, led by Preston, advocated for a more traditional crisis management strategy, minimize liability, emphasize that this was an isolated incident, and focus on rebuilding the brand rather than acknowledging deeper problems. The meeting ended without resolution, but with a clear division forming between those who supported Hayes' vision for the company and those who prioritized short-term financial interests. As Hayes finally left the office near midnight, his phone buzzed with a news alert. Gateway employee whistleblowers reveal pattern of racial profiling. The crisis, it seemed, was only beginning. The Harvard University campus sprawled before Ella in all its ivy-covered, red brick glory. Under different circumstances, her first week would have been filled with wide-eyed wonder at walking the same paths as presidents and Nobel laureates. Instead, she moved through orientation activities like a ghost, hyper-aware of the whispers and stares that followed her everywhere. That's her, the girl from the Airline video. I heard she's suing for millions. My dad says it was all staged for social media. 3 days into orientation, Ella sat alone at a cafeteria table, picking at a salad she had no appetite for. Her phone buzzed with yet another call from a number she didn't recognize, likely another reporter. She had stopped answering unknown calls after the second day, when a particularly aggressive journalist had somehow obtained her personal number. A tray clattered onto the table across from her. Ella looked up to see a young woman with curly hair and warm brown skin sliding into the seat. Mind if I join you? All the other tables have people talking to each other, and I'm not in a social mood. The woman smiled, extending her hand. I'm Charlotte. Ella recognized the name immediately. Charlotte Hayes. Charlotte nodded. The same. Though I was hoping to just be Charlotte for a minute before the whole daughter of that airline CEO thing came up. Sorry, Ella said, feeling oddly caught off guard. You texted me on the plane, and you never responded, Charlotte pointed out with a small smile. I figured you either didn't want to talk to anyone connected to Gateway, or you were overwhelmed with everything. Both would be totally understandable. Ella studied Charlotte more carefully. There was something familiar in her features, the same determined set of the jaw she had seen in Lawrence Hayes, but softened with a warmth that felt genuine. I was overwhelmed, Ella admitted. Still am, honestly. Charlotte nodded. I can only imagine. When my dad told me what happened, I was furious. Not just because it was awful, but because it was so depressingly familiar. You've experienced similar things? Ella asked, surprised despite herself. She had assumed that being the daughter of a wealthy CEO would shield Charlotte from the kind of discrimination she had faced. Not exactly the same, Charlotte acknowledged, but variations on the theme. Security following me around stores, campus police stopping me to verify I'm a student, people assuming I'm on athletic scholarship rather than academic. She shrugged. The greatest hits of being black in elite spaces. For the first time in days, Ella felt the knot in her chest loosen slightly. Here was someone who understood, who didn't need Ella to explain or justify her feelings. How are your classes going? Charlotte asked, changing the subject with a perceptiveness that suggested she recognized Ella's fatigue with discussing the incident. They haven't really started yet. Just introductory sessions. Ella hesitated, then admitted, I've been thinking about deferring for a semester until this all dies down. Charlotte frowned. Is that what you want? Or what feels easier right now? The question hit Ella with unexpected force. I don't know, she said honestly. I worked so hard to get here, but now it feels like I'm the racist incident girl before I'm anything else. That's how they win, Charlotte said quietly. When we start second-guessing our presence in spaces we've earned the right to occupy. Have you ever felt out of place in an environment you worked hard to enter? Comment number 1 if you've experienced imposter syndrome, or number 2 if you've had to justify your presence in a space where others assumed you didn't belong. Like and subscribe to join our ongoing discussion about belonging and identity in America. What would you do in Ella's position? Would you stay and fight to reclaim your narrative, or step back to protect your mental health? And what responsibility do institutions like Harvard and Gateway Airlines have to address the systemic issues that create these painful situations in the first place? Back in Chicago, Vanessa Johnson sat at her kitchen table surrounded by bills and paperwork. The hospital had been understanding about her sudden leave of absence to support Ella, but understanding didn't pay the rent. Without her regular nursing shifts, the financial cushion she had carefully built was rapidly depleting. Her phone rang. Lawrence Hayes again. He had called daily since the incident, checking on Ella and offering support. Vanessa had been initially suspicious of his motives, wondering if his concern was genuine or just damage control. But his persistence and apparent sincerity had begun to wear down her skepticism. "Mr. Hayes," she answered. "Mrs. Johnson, I hope I'm not disturbing you. I wanted to update you on the situation at Gateway." Vanessa sighed. "I've seen the news. Your company's stock is falling, and now there's talk about previous incidents." "Yes," Hayes acknowledged. "The truth is, what happened to Ella wasn't an isolated incident. We're uncovering evidence of systemic issues that predated my tenure, but that I failed to fully eradicate." His voice carried the weight of personal responsibility. "I wanted you to know that Gateway has placed Richard Whitley and Christine Palmer on administrative leave pending investigation, and we've terminated our contract with the security firm that employed Taylor Brooks." "And what about Ella?" Vanessa asked. "Her face is healing, but this incident will follow her for years. Every time someone Googles her name, this is what they'll find." There was a pause before Hayes responded. "I've been thinking about that. Gateway would like to establish a substantial scholarship fund in Ella's name for Black students pursuing medical careers, not as compensation. Nothing could compensate for what she experienced, but as a way to create something positive from this situation." Vanessa considered the offer. "That's Ella's decision to make, not mine." "But Mr. Hayes, what my daughter needs right now isn't a scholarship with her name on it. She needs to know she belongs at Harvard, that she earned her place there, and that what happened at your airport doesn't define her." "I understand," Hayes said, "and for what it's worth, my daughter Charlotte feels the same way. She's actually reached out to Ella at Harvard." This was news to Vanessa. "Ella hasn't mentioned meeting your daughter. Charlotte said they had lunch yesterday, I think. I hope it might help Ella to have someone who understands what she's going through." After ending the call, Vanessa returned to her bills with a heavy heart. The unpaid leave was necessary. Ella needed her support, but the financial strain was becoming untenable. She would need to return to work soon, leaving Ella to navigate the aftermath alone. Meanwhile, Lawrence Hayes faced his own personal crisis. His wife Rebecca met him at the door of their Buckhead home with a troubled expression. "William Preston called the house looking for you," she said. "He mentioned something about a vote of no confidence." Hayes nodded grimly. "A faction of the board wants me out. They think I'm handling the situation too aggressively, prioritizing ethics over shareholder value." Rebecca, who had built her own successful legal career before retiring to focus on their family foundation, studied her husband's face. "And what do you think?" "I think they're right," Hayes admitted. "I am prioritizing ethics over short-term profits, because the alternative is to maintain a system that would discriminate against our own daughter." Rebecca squeezed his hand. "Charlotte called earlier. She's having lunch with Ella Johnson again tomorrow." "Good," Hayes said, genuinely pleased. "Ella needs allies right now. So do you," Rebecca pointed out. "The board meeting is tomorrow. What's your strategy?" Hayes had been wrestling with this question for days. Fight to maintain control of the company he had worked 15 years to lead, or take a stand on principle, even if it meant losing everything he had built. "I'm going to tell them the truth," he finally said, "that I would rather resign than lead a company that tolerates discrimination, and then I'll see if I still have a job." That night, as Ella prepared for bed in her Harvard dormitory, she received another text from Charlotte. "My dad might lose his job because he's refusing to back down on addressing the racial issues at Gateway. He says it's worth it. Thought you should know." Ella stared at the message for a long time, unsure how to feel. The CEO's career was in jeopardy because of what happened to her. Was that justice? or just another ripple effect of violence she hadn't asked for? And what responsibility, if any, did she have in this ongoing corporate drama? As she finally drifted off to sleep, Ella realized that the incident at the airport had expanded far beyond her personal experience. It had become a flashpoint in a larger conversation about race, power, and accountability in America, conversation she was now inextricably part of, whether she wanted to be or not. The pattern is undeniable, Benjamin Cooper said, spreading dozens of printed emails across his cluttered desk. At 34, Cooper had built a reputation as one of the most tenacious investigative journalists in Atlanta. His office walls were adorned with framed copies of exposes that had brought down corrupt politicians and unethical corporations. Across from him sat Ella, who had flown back to Atlanta for the weekend at Cooper's request. The journalist had spent 2 weeks gathering testimony from current and former Gateway employees, building a comprehensive picture of the airline's discriminatory practices. These internal communications show that Gateway's management was not only aware of racial profiling but actively encouraged it, Cooper continued, highlighting passages in various documents. They used coded language, maintaining customer experience standards and passenger profile assessment, but the meaning was clear. Ella picked up one of the emails, dated just 3 months earlier. In it, a regional supervisor instructed, check-in staff to ensure premium cabin demographic alignment by applying additional verification steps for non-traditional first-class passengers. The implications turned her stomach. How many people experienced what I did? She asked quietly. Based on our investigation, hundreds over the past 5 years, Cooper replied. Most incidents weren't as severe as yours, and many passengers didn't report them for fear of escalation. But the pattern is consistent. Black passengers, particularly younger ones or those dressed casually, face disproportionate scrutiny when flying in premium cabins. Cooper slid another document across the desk, a sworn statement from Maria Diaz, a former Gateway flight attendant. After your incident went viral, people started coming forward. Ms. Diaz worked for Gateway for 7 years and witnessed systematic discrimination throughout her tenure. Ella scanned the statement, her hands trembling slightly as she read Diaz's account of being instructed to provide enhanced surveillance of black passengers in first class and to verify their tickets multiple times during flights. Gateway isn't unique, Cooper noted. This happens across the industry, but your case has created an opportunity for accountability that rarely exists. What do you need from me? Ella asked, meeting Cooper's gaze directly. An interview. Your perspective, your voice. Cooper leaned forward. Your story has resonated with people because it's both shocking and familiar. It happened to you, but it could have happened to any black person trying to occupy a space others believe they don't belong in. Ella hesitated. Becoming the face of this story meant extended time in the spotlight, more scrutiny, more opinions about her from strangers, more difficulty in simply being a college student. I need to think about it, she said finally. This isn't just about me anymore. Cooper nodded respectfully. Take the time you need, but know that your voice matters in this conversation. As Ella left Cooper's office, her phone buzzed with a text from Charlotte. How did the meeting go? Want to grab coffee before your flight back? They met at a quiet cafe near Centennial Park, far enough from the Gateway headquarters to avoid running into airline employees. Charlotte arrived first, securing a corner table that offered some privacy. Thanks for meeting me, Ella said as she sat down. It's been an intense morning. Charlotte nodded sympathetically. Cooper's investigation is picking up steam. It's all anyone at Gateway is talking about. How's your dad handling it? Ella asked, surprising herself with how much she genuinely cared about the answer. Charlotte paused, searching for the right words. He's determined. The board meeting was brutal. William Preston basically called for his resignation, accused him of corporate sabotage for being too transparent about the discrimination issues. And Ella prompted when Charlotte fell silent. Dad refused to back down. He told them he would rather lose his position than pretend the company doesn't have a serious problem. Charlotte smiled faintly. He can be stubborn when he believes in something. That must be hard on your family, Ella observed. Charlotte shrugged. My mom supports him completely, and honestly, so do I growing up. I watched him navigate predominantly white corporate spaces by compromising, by being one of the good ones who didn't rock the boat. This is the first time I've seen him really take a stand, even when it costs him personally." Their conversation was interrupted by Ella's phone ringing. Vanessa calling. "Mom, everything okay?" "I just got off the phone with our landlord," Vanessa said, her voice strained. "They're not renewing our lease. Something about renovations. But the timing seems suspicious." Ella felt a chill. "You think it's connected to what happened?" "I don't know, baby. But we've been good tenants for 6 years with no issues. And suddenly they need the apartment back right when your face is all over the news. Seems convenient." After assuring her mother she would call back later, Ella hung up and explained the situation to Charlotte. "That's retaliation," Charlotte said immediately, pure and simple. "But how do we prove it?" Ella asked, frustration evident in her voice. "It's always just beneath the surface, just plausibly deniable enough." Charlotte hesitated before speaking again. "My dad might be able to help. He has connections with housing advocacy groups. Through our family foundation." Ella felt a familiar resistance rising within her, the instinctive wariness of accepting help. "That might come with strings attached. I appreciate the offer, but it's not charity," Charlotte interrupted, recognizing Ella's discomfort. "It's solidarity. What's happening to your mom is wrong, and we have resources that might help. That's all." Before Ella could respond, her phone buzzed with a news alert. Gateway Airline's largest shareholder, William Preston, takes control as interim CEO. Lawrence Hayes steps down amid controversy. Charlotte saw the headline at the same time and went pale. "He did it," she whispered. "He actually resigned." Across town, Lawrence Hayes was clearing out his office under the watchful eye of Gateway security. The board meeting that morning had presented him with an ultimatum: publicly walk back his statements about systemic discrimination at Gateway, or step down. He had chosen the latter without hesitation. As he placed his family photos in a cardboard box, his assistant Julia knocked on the door frame. "Mr. Hayes, I just wanted to say, many of us support your decision. It means a lot to see leadership with integrity." Hayes smiled gratefully. "Thank you, Julia. That means more than you know." His phone rang. William Preston calling, undoubtedly to gloat or to pressure him into signing additional non-disclosure agreements. Hayes declined the call. Later that evening, as Ella prepared to board her flight back to Boston on a different airline this time, Cooper called with an update. "Ms. Johnson, something big is happening. After Hayes resigned, dozens of current and former Gateway employees started contacting us. They're ready to go on record about discriminatory practices. And there's more. We've uncovered evidence that William Preston personally blocked diversity initiatives at Gateway for years." Ella thought about Charlotte's revelation that her father had resigned rather than compromise his principles. She thought about her mother potentially losing her home. She thought about all the people who had experienced discrimination without having a CEO intervene on their behalf. "I'll do the interview," she decided. "The story needs to be told." 2 days later, Cooper's Expose was published simultaneously, in print and online. The headline read, "Exclusive: Inside Gateway Airlines Systematic Discrimination Against Black Passengers." Ella's account featured prominently, alongside testimonies from 27 current and former Gateway employees. The article revealed that Preston had personally authored a memo in 2015 arguing against diversity hiring in customer-facing positions, claiming it would alienate Gateway's core demographic. It also detailed how Preston had vetoed Hayes' proposal for anti-bias training just 6 months earlier, dismissing it as unnecessary political correctness. The public reaction was swift and devastating for Gateway. The airline's stock plummeted 15% in a single day. #BoycottGateway became the top trending topic nationwide. Several major corporations suspended their business travel contracts. With the airline, Preston called an emergency press conference, attempting to dismiss the allegations as disgruntled employee exaggerations and frame Hayes' resignation as a personal decision unrelated to company policies. Few were convinced. Meanwhile, Charlotte texted Ella, "Have you seen the news?" Dad's phone has been ringing non-stop with reporters, but he's focusing on starting something new. He wants to meet with you when you're ready." For the first time since the original incident, Ella felt something akin to hope. Not because one company was facing consequences, but because the larger pattern was finally being exposed, not just at Gateway, but across industries and institutions, where such discrimination had long been normalized. That night, as Ella worked on a biology assignment in her dorm room, she received an unexpected email from the Hayes Foundation. "Dear Ms. Johnson, in light of recent events, we would like to discuss expanding our scholarship program to support more students from underrepresented backgrounds. As someone who has demonstrated exceptional courage and integrity, we would value your input on how this initiative should be structured. Sincerely, Rebecca Hayes, Executive Director." Ella stared at the screen for a long moment, considering the complex web of connections that had formed from that single moment of discrimination at an airport check-in counter. Then she began to type her reply. The October rain lashed against the windows of Ella's dormitory room as she stared blankly at her laptop screen. The half-finished psychology paper due tomorrow remained stubbornly incomplete, her usually sharp mind unable to focus on academic theory when real-life trauma continued to dominate her thoughts. Her phone buzzed with a text from her academic advisor requesting an urgent meeting. Another professor concerned about her slipping grades, no doubt. In the 6 weeks since the Gateway incident, Ella had watched her perfect academic record erode as concentration became increasingly difficult. Nightmares disrupted her sleep, featuring variations of public humiliation and physical restraint. During daylight hours, she jumped at sudden movements and avoided crowds. A knock at her door startled her. Charlotte stood in the hallway, concern evident in her expression. "You missed study group again," Charlotte said gently. "And you haven't been answering texts." Ella stepped back to let her friend enter. The room was uncharacteristically disheveled, clothes piled on chairs, takeout containers stacked on the desk, bed unmade. "I've been busy," Ella said defensively. Charlotte didn't challenge the obvious lie. Instead, she picked up a letter from Ella's desk. "What's this? Notice about my scholarship review." Ella replied flatly, apparently. "My academic performance doesn't currently meet program standards." Charlotte's eyes widened. "They can't be serious, after everything you've been through?" "That's the thing about prestigious institutions," Ella said with bitter resignation. "They love having diverse faces in their brochures until those faces become complicated by actual, lived experiences of racism. Have you talked to anyone about what you're going through?" "A counselor, maybe," Ella laughed humorlessly. "You mean explain to another person who's never experienced what I have? How it feels to be physically assaulted for trying to claim space I earned? No thanks." Charlotte was quiet for a moment before speaking again. "I know someone, a black therapist who specializes in racial trauma. She helped me after an incident at Brown last year." "I don't need therapy," Ella insisted. "I need people to stop treating me like I don't belong everywhere I've worked to be." "It's not either or," Charlotte countered. "You can fight the system while also taking care of yourself." Before Ella could respond, her phone rang, her mother calling. She answered immediately, hearing the distress in Vanessa's voice before she even spoke. "They're saying we have to be out by the end of the month," Vanessa said without preamble. "The lawyer from the tenant rights organization says there's nothing we can do." The landlord found a loophole. Ella closed her eyes, absorbing yet another blow. "Where will you go?" "Your Aunt Denise said I can stay with her temporarily. But it's a studio apartment. There's barely room for one person, let alone to plus all our things." After promising to call back later, Ella hung up and explained the situation to Charlotte. "This is retaliation," Charlotte said firmly, "plain and simple, but impossible to prove." Ella countered, "Just like it's impossible to prove that the security guard at the library randomly checking only my ID yesterday was racially motivated. Just like it's impossible to prove that my discussion section leader consistently interrupting me is because of implicit bias." The accumulated weight of these experiences suddenly felt unbearable. Tears she had been suppressing for weeks finally broke through. "I can't do this anymore. Charlotte, I can't keep pretending I'm okay when everything is falling apart. Charlotte, moved to sit beside her friend, offering silent support as Ella finally allowed herself to release the pain, fear, and frustration she had been carrying. When the tears subsided, Charlotte spoke softly. "You don't have to face this alone. My dad resigned because he believes in fighting these battles. My mom's foundation has connections with housing advocates who might help your mother. And I know for a fact that Harvard has resources for students experiencing trauma, even if they're imperfect." Ella wiped her eyes. "Why are you doing all this? We barely knew each other before this happened." "Because it could have been me," Charlotte answered simply. "Because it has been me in different ways. And because change only happens when people with privilege use it to dismantle the systems that hurt others." Later that evening, after Charlotte had left, Ella received an unexpected call from Lawrence Hayes. "Ms. Johnson, I hope I'm not disturbing you. I wanted to update you on some developments." Ella put the call on speaker as she continued organizing her chaotic room. Finding the activity helped steady her emotions. "I heard about your resignation. I'm sorry." "Don't be," Hayes replied. "It was the right decision. But that's not why I'm calling. I've been approached by a group of investors interested in starting a new airline with ethical practices at its core. They want me to lead it." "Congratulations," Ella said, unsure why he was sharing this with her. "Thank you, but that's still preliminary. What's more immediate is that William Preston has instituted new policies at Gateway that are concerning. Employee sources tell me they're implementing even stricter passenger verification procedures, especially in premium cabins." Ella felt a chill. "They're doubling down on profiling?" "It appears so. Preston is betting that the controversy will blow over and it's cheaper to weather bad publicity than to implement real changes." Hayes paused. "There's something else. My foundation offered to help with your mother's housing situation, but she declined." This was news to Ella. "She didn't tell me that. She's a proud woman, and I respect that. But the offer stands if she reconsiders." After ending the call, Ella stared at her phone thoughtfully. Her mother had always taught her self-reliance, but at what cost? Was refusing help when it was genuinely offered another form of self-harm? The next morning, Ella made two decisions that would alter the course of events. First, she called the therapist Charlotte had recommended and scheduled an appointment. Second, she emailed Benjamin Cooper agreeing to a follow-up interview focused specifically on the ongoing issues at Gateway under Preston's leadership. 3 days later, Ella stood before a crowd of hundreds at a campus rally organized by Harvard's Black Student Association. Despite her racing heart and dry mouth, she approached the microphone with determination. "My name is Gabriella Johnson," she began, her voice initially shaky, but gaining strength with each word. "2 months ago, I was physically assaulted by airport security for the crime of flying while black. My story went viral, but it's not unique. What happened to me happens to black people across America every day in airports, in stores, in schools, in neighborhoods." The crowd listened in rapt attention as Ella continued. "For weeks, I've been struggling. My grades have suffered. My mother is losing her home. My sense of security has been shattered, and I've been asking myself, why am I fighting so hard to belong in spaces that weren't built for people who look like me?" She paused, looking out at the sea of faces. "But then I realized that's exactly what they want. They want us to doubt ourselves, to shrink, to leave, and I refuse to give them that satisfaction. We belong everywhere we have earned the right to be, regardless of who feels uncomfortable with our presence." The applause was thunderous. As Ella stepped away from the microphone, she felt something shift within her, reclaiming of agency. She had lost that day in the airport terminal. Meanwhile, across the country, Gateway Airlines was facing an unprecedented crisis. Following Cooper's second expose featuring Ella's new interview, alongside testimonies from current employees about worsening conditions under Preston, Gateway's employees took dramatic action, led by flight attendants and gate agents. The front line, workers who had been forced to implement discriminatory policies, employees at major hubs, staged a coordinated walkout. Signs reading "No more profiling" and "Justice for passengers" appeared at airports nationwide. Preston appeared on financial news networks, attempting to frame the walkout as union agitation unrelated to discrimination issues. But the damage was done, with flights canceled and public support firmly behind the employees. Gateway's stock went into free fall that evening, as Ella was leaving her first therapy session. A difficult but cathartic experience, she received a call from Vanessa. "I've been offered a position coordinating community health programs for the Hayes Foundation," Vanessa said, a mix of excitement and uncertainty in her voice. "The salary is better than the hospital, and it comes with housing assistance." "That's amazing, Mom," Ella replied genuinely. "Are you going to take it?" There was a pause before Vanessa answered, "I think I am. I've spent so long teaching you to be independent that I forgot to teach you. It's okay to accept help sometimes, especially when it's offered with respect rather than pity." Later that night, Charlotte texted Ella, "Just heard from Dad. Preston is out. Board fired him after major shareholders demanded action. Gateway stock down 40% this month." Ella stared at the message, feeling a complex mix of emotions. The system that had humiliated her was facing consequences. But at what cost to the thousands of employees who depended on Gateway for their livelihoods? Was this justice or just another cycle of damage? Before she could respond, another text from Charlotte arrived. "Dad's new airline project is moving forward. They want to name it Ascend. He says it's about rising above old ways of doing business. What do you think?" For the first time in weeks, Ella smiled genuinely. Perhaps something good could emerge from this after all, not just consequences for wrongdoing, but a new model for doing better. The spring sunshine streamed through the windows of Harvard's Sanders Theater as Ella adjusted her blazer and reviewed her notes one final time. 18 months had passed since that fateful day at Atlanta International Airport, and while the scar on her cheek had faded to a faint line, the experience had left more permanent marks on her life and on the world around her. "5 minutes, Ms. Johnson," the event coordinator said, peeking into the green room. "We've got a full house." Ella nodded her thanks, taking a deep breath to calm her nerves. Public speaking still triggered anxiety, a lingering effect of the public humiliation she had experienced, but her therapist had helped her develop coping strategies. She had come to see her willingness to continue speaking despite the fear as its own form of resistance. Today's event marked the official launch of the Johnson Initiative for Inclusive Excellence, a joint project between Harvard University and the Hayes Foundation aimed at supporting students from marginalized backgrounds, not just financially, but emotionally and structurally. Ella, now a sophomore, had helped design the program based on her own experiences and those of other students who had shared their stories with her. As she walked onto the stage to enthusiastic applause, Ella spotted familiar faces in the audience. Her mother, Vanessa, sat in the front row, elegant in a navy suit that reflected her new role as community outreach director for the Hayes Foundation. Beside her sat Lawrence and Rebecca Hayes, whose support had evolved from crisis management to genuine allyship. Charlotte, now Ella's roommate and closest friend, gave an encouraging thumbs up from her seat. "Thank you all for being here today," Ella began, her voice steady and clear. 18 months ago, I was physically assaulted at an airport check-in counter for the crime of being black in first class. What happened to me that day was traumatic, but unfortunately not unique. What is unique is what has happened since." She outlined the journey from that incident to the present day, the viral outrage, the corporate reckoning, the personal toll, and ultimately, the collaborative work to create meaningful change. The Johnson Initiative is not about helping students of color fit into predominantly white institutions, she explained. It's about transforming those institutions to truly value diversity, to recognize the unique challenges faced by marginalized students, and to create environments where everyone can thrive authentically. As Ella spoke, her gaze occasionally drifted to a table near the back where 3 unexpected attendees sat: Richard Whitley, Christine Palmer, and Taylor Brooks, the Gateway employees whose actions had sparked this chain of events. Their presence wasn't coincidental. After facing legal consequences for civil rights violations, Richard and Christine had received probation and community service requirements. While Brooks had served 6 months for assault, all three had been required to undergo extensive anti-bias training. Part of their restorative justice process included listening to Ella speak about the impact of their actions. Transformation doesn't happen through punishment alone, Ella continued, acknowledging their presence with a slight nod. It requires accountability, yes, but also education, empathy, and opportunity for growth. The systems that enable discrimination are larger than any individual, and dismantling them requires collective effort. After the formal presentation, Ella mingled with attendees at the reception. Lawrence Hayes approached, looking more relaxed than she had ever seen him. The weight of corporate politics had been replaced by the energetic purpose of building something new. Ascend Airline's first flights launch next month, he told her proudly. We've implemented every recommendation from your student advisory committee in our training and policies. Ascend had risen from Gateway's ashes after the larger airline declared bankruptcy following months of boycotts, lawsuits, and mass employee departures. Hayes' new venture had attracted significant investment by positioning itself as the industry's first truly inclusive airline, with equity and dignity built into every aspect of its business model. And the staff demographics, Ella asked, having specifically advocated for hiring practices that would create a workforce reflecting the diversity of the communities served. 47% people of color across all levels, including executive leadership. Hayes replied, not where we ultimately wanted to be, but a strong start. Vanessa joined them, her arm linked with Rebecca Hayes. The two women had formed an unexpected friendship while working together on the Foundation's community initiatives. The Housing Advocacy Program has secured stable homes for 78 families so far, Vanessa reported, including 3 former Gateway employees who lost everything when the company collapsed. The irony wasn't lost on Ella. Her mother was now helping some of the same people who had worked for the company that had discriminated against her daughter. But that was Vanessa. Pragmatic compassion had always been her way. As the reception wound down, Ella found herself face to face with Richard Whitley. The former Gateway manager looked diminished somehow, his earlier arrogance replaced by a cautious humility. Ms. Johnson, he said, clearly uncomfortable, I wanted to thank you for allowing us to attend today and to apologize again for my actions that day. Ella studied him carefully. Are you still sorry it happened, or are you beginning to understand why it happened? Richard nodded slowly. The training program has been eye-opening. I'm starting to recognize patterns in my thinking that I never questioned before. He paused. I have a long way to go. We all do, Ella acknowledged. The work of transformation is never finished. Later that evening, Ella, Charlotte, and Vanessa gathered in Ella's dorm room, celebrating the successful launch with takeout and comfortable conversation. On Ella's desk sat an official invitation, Ascend Airline's inaugural flight from Atlanta to Boston, with Ella listed as the guest of honor. Are you going to accept? Charlotte asked, noticing Ella studying the invitation. I think so, Ella replied. It feels like closing a circle somehow. Vanessa squeezed her daughter's hand. I'm so proud of who you've become through all this, baby girl. You took something painful and turned it into purpose. 1 month later, Ella boarded Ascend's first official flight. As she settled into her first-class seat, she couldn't help but reflect on the journey that had brought her here. The trauma of that day would always be part of her story, but it no longer defined her future. The flight attendant approaching. Her seat was a young black woman with a warm smile. Ms. Johnson, welcome aboard. We're honored to have you with us today. The greeting was delivered with genuine respect, not the wary suspicion of someone questioning her right to occupy the space, but the appreciation due to a valued guest. As the plane accelerated down the runway, Ella looked out at the Atlanta skyline receding below. So much had changed in 18 months. A major corporation had fallen. New enterprises had risen. Policies had been rewritten. Lives had been redirected, including her own. The path forward wasn't perfect. Discrimination wouldn't disappear overnight. New challenges would emerge. But something fundamental had shifted, both in the world around her and within herself. She had discovered her voice, her power, and her purpose. As the plane reached cruising altitude, The captain's voice came over the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is Captain Williams speaking. On behalf of everyone at Ascend Airlines, I want to welcome you aboard our historic first flight. Our mission is to create an aviation experience where everyone travels with dignity, everyone belongs, and everyone rises together." Ella smiled at the words, knowing she had helped shape them. From trauma had come transformation, from pain had come purpose, from a single moment of injustice had come a movement for change. The story reminds us that systemic racism persists not through dramatic acts of hatred, but through everyday assumptions about who belongs in certain spaces. Ella's experience reveals how institutions often protect discriminatory practices, while placing the burden of proof on victims. Yet it also demonstrates how accountability can create meaningful change. True transformation requires courage at multiple levels. The courage of those who experience discrimination to speak their truth, the courage of allies with privilege to risk their own comfort and status, and the courage of institutions to acknowledge failures and implement structural changes. The path forward isn't about punishing individuals alone, but redesigning systems to prevent discrimination from happening in the first place. Progress comes when we recognize that diversity isn't just about who gets invited into spaces, but about who feels truly welcomed, valued, and respected once they arrive. Most importantly, this story teaches us that while we cannot control the discrimination we may face, we can control how we respond to it, whether we allow it to diminish us or use it as fuel to create a more just world for those who will follow in our footsteps. What moments of discrimination have you witnessed where someone should have spoken up? Has anyone ever stood up for you when you faced unfair treatment? Comment below with your experiences and how they changed you. If Ella's journey resonated with you, please like this video and subscribe for more stories that expose injustice and celebrate resilience. Share this with someone who needs strength to confront discrimination in their own life. Thank you for joining us in this important conversation about racism and transformation. Remember, every time we choose courage over comfort, we help create a world where everyone can travel, learn, work, and live with the dignity they deserve.